One of the big stories over there today is we have one of the top conservatives in Great Britain switching her allegiance from being a Leave person to a Stay person. We got to look at her now. Baroness Warsi is her name. And the accusation there is that people who are supporting, people who are for leaving, that they're spreading hate and xenophobia, trying to win more votes. We're joined now from London by a member of the European Parliament, Daniel Hannan, who's with us. And, I mean, basically saying people who support this idea of leaving are racist, right? I mean, what do you make of that?
It's the opposite of the truth. You know, those of us who want to leave the EU are not little Englanders. We're global Britaners. We want a United Kingdom that is pursuing its traditional links of language and law and custom and kinship and habit and history that link us to every continent. We don't want to be shackled to one declining trade bloc at the western tip of the Eurasian landmass. We want to raise our eyes to more distant horizons. And you know, it couldn't be the conversation you were just having about protectionism, right, and all that. It couldn't be further from the truth. Our problem is that the EU is protectionist. It stands in the way of a more global, liberal trading arrangement. We're a merchant country, a maritime country, and we want to break loose from those tariffs and have a more open economy. Okay, so tell me how, because the conventional way of thinking, and I think it's being supported in the way the markets are reacting today, not to, you know, that's not necessarily a justification for it, they're not always right, so to speak, or if there's not necessarily a right or wrong in markets, but people with their money are betting that if the UK stays within the EU, that's quote-unquote better. And I think part of their rationale from talking to them, they're saying that's because you'd still have open borders and free trade as a result of that, you say? Markets always like stability. Markets hate change. You know, there is a market fall before every election. There's a recovery the day after the election because uncertainty is anathema to them. But there is a long-standing globalist tradition in this country, a free trading, internationalist tradition in Britain. No one's talking about closing the borders. We want some control over who comes in, but I think everyone accepts that we're a growing economy. There's still going to be primary economic migration. And certainly the case for a different deal, a different relationship with the EU. We want to keep the free trade with Europe, but at the moment, because the EU controls our external trade policy, we can't have a free trade agreement with India. We can't have a free trade agreement with Canada. We can't have a free trade agreement with you, because Brussels controls those things. And whereas Britain's instincts are free trading and globalist, you know, we're held back by the protectionism of French farmers and Italian textile workers and other vested interests on the continent that don't really want liberalization.
Understood, and you want to act in your own interests as opposed to the interest of all of Europe, or having to put up with what those other people are saying. Let me go back to immigration, though, for a moment, and at least have that conversation. That's where we started. Because, again, not us Americans, as you know, I'm sure, we like to make this about us, right? But we are having a similar conversation here in our political season, in our election season. A lot of it was started by Donald Trump and the idea of building a wall and this and that, and the immigration's become a big political issue here. So what is it about in Europe? It's about terrorism? Is it about, as you say, control? What's your biggest concern about the open borders or the policy, people be going country to country within the EU?
Yeah, it's about control. You know, of course, you can find some people in Britain who will agree with Donald Trump, and we don't need to build a wall, obviously, we've got the channel. But this is not about closing our border. We've had immigration in tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands every year. We still have labour shortages in my constituency. What we found is that there are cases where, even where there are individuals who've been involved in crime or in radical Islamism, we're not able to deport them because the European Court steps in and says this is violating their rights as EU citizens. And I think, you know, I'm someone who's basically pro-immigration and liberal on the subject. But if I'm going to win that argument, if I'm going to carry my constituency with me, people ask in return that we should be in charge of roughly who comes in and roughly in what numbers. And as long as we're in the EU, they have no such sense. And that's really what the argument's about.
Okay. Finally, it looks like from the polls, and as I said at the outset, at the top of the broadcast, I think in Scotland they were a little off, and they've been off in political stories here many times. Looks like from the polls your side is losing now. How does it feel to you? What does it look like on the ground?
You know, if I could answer that question for sure, I'd be a millionaire, you know, and I'd have... I don't know. It will come down on the day to who turns out. It's very, very close. We've always been the underdog here. You know, it's very difficult to carry people against the status quo. We've had the mega banks and the multinationals pouring money into the other side because it suits them to have this kind of cartel with the Brussels regulation. But I think we've got a better song to sing.
Okay.
We'll see what happens.
Well, thanks for, you know, singing it to us today. We appreciate it. It was a good discussion.
Thank you.
Giving us your side of it. Daniel Hannan from the European Parliament, a member of that Parliament.